A viral internet challenge appears to be regaining ground among young adults as the cost of living remains high. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, May 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. The No Buy Challenge, it's the new flex in town among young adults, with spending regarded as sitting, if you will, as the cost of living continues to rise. For more on this, I have independent journalist Kelly Kasulis Cho here in the studio. Kelly, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio with us. Steven, it's great to have you here.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Kelly, let's begin with some context behind the No Buy Challenge among young adults worldwide, of course. How did this, or when did this challenge appear to regain greater ground among the younger demographic, and how popular is it as we speak?
Yeah, this idea of like a zero spend culture online, some people track it back to the early COVID days or right in that kind of transitionary period out of the pandemic, so maybe like 2021, 2022. It seems to be gaining more traction right now in Korea, and in the States too. There's a lot of they don't call it zero spend in the States so much as like this de-influencing side of social media, but it's this idea where you don't need to buy something, you don't need to spend any money at all. You have everything that you need, most likely in most cases, in your home. It's like this anti-consumerist culture, and apparently it's really big right now with people in their 20s and 30s in Korea. But when I was doing research about this, I think there is like an interesting dichotomy. Like there's a lot of media reports that young people like Gen Zs are really cheap, that they don't want to spend money, they don't want to go out and drink alcohol, they don't want to go to restaurants. But on the other hand, you will see reports that they're some of the greatest luxury spenders right now. So there's a Korean research analysis firm that said that 43% of the luxury market is actually Korean Gen Zs, so people in their 20s and early 30s. So I think there's kind of two dueling narratives going on, and this has also existed in the United States. Certainly luxury brands in the last 10, 15 years have really become something that a middle-class person wants and tends to spend money on more and more. But at the same time, we have this kind of fringe subculture on social media that is like an extreme version of frugality where you're trying to go 30 days without spending any money at all, which is a very hard thing to do. I've tried it myself, and as we were talking about off air, I only made it one day without spending any money.
Right, but one day, big deal. Steven, with regard to the trend here in South Korea, is it being driven by rising costs or changing values, do you think?
It's probably both. I would say that it's, when you look at these phenomena, like when and how they pop up, like they're generally like, I think a kind of rational response to economic conditions. I would say that like, if you go back to COVID, I think what COVID did is it really created something that was kind of unprecedented. It created a real like scarcity of experience. It created this scenario where like, even if you had money, even if you, as people did not do things, as people could not go out, people couldn't travel, people had no reason to like buy new clothes or no reason to like buy a new car. All this, they had this money kind of building up and up and up, and then like once the travel restrictions were lifted, once life got kind of back to normal, there was this kind of pent-up demand for just being out and just having real kind of in-person shared experiences. And the COVID pandemic also just kind of made everybody appreciate those experiences, I think, in a different way. People didn't take them for granted as much anymore. What we're seeing now is distinct from that, and I think that the situation in the Middle East and a number of other factors are really kind of driving home the risk of real material scarcity. So I think that's probably why this current movement is focusing on like not buying things and like not consuming. Like this is probably the first time since the pandemic that there's been this kind of credible risk that like oil shipments may not make it to this part of the world, and then if they don't, you may not be able to, a lot of these chemicals go into cosmetics and they go into plastics and they go into all these different things that people need. I have to assume my local grocery store is still rationing garbage bags to one per customer. And the lady who last sold me one, she specified, she said, well, are you going to put your purchase in this? You know, you can't just have the bag to take with you. It has to, you know, whatever item you just bought has to be going into this bag. So I think that maybe like one positive spin from this could be that like this current phase of scarcity, nobody wants it to last forever, but like one thing that it could do is it could kind of demystify like physical spending and like the acquisition of objects and, you know, like the desire to obtain material things. Maybe people will see if they go for it without a while, they'll think, well, you know, maybe I do not need to spend, you know, 4 million won on a luxury handbag, and, you know, maybe I'm happy without that. But I think these things come and go, and, you know, I just would say that as larger scale economic conditions change, these phenomena will kind of change in response.
Right. And Kelly, what more can you tell us about the role of social media in promoting perhaps these frugal living styles?
There's a few things that I've seen out there. So in the English social media world, I get a lot of content that is like de-influencers, so people who actually make money, right, selling the idea that you need to be de-influenced. So people who are influencers professionally telling you to not listen to influencers. And so a lot of that kind of content is you know, showing products that tend to go viral on platforms like Temu or on these like online kind of like live shopping sale platforms, and showing that they don't work, or that the quality is poor, or that you already have something in your home. So you'll see a lot of like TikTok reels that will be like, you don't need a pink purse, you don't need an extra pair of shoes, right? You don't need a mason jar with a straw, things like that. So that is really kind of the trend right now in the States. In Korea, I've noticed there's like this zero spend challenge, and so it's usually people taking you through their daily life and kind of what they do to avoid spending literally a dime or a single won. There's also something called Nengpa. Have you heard of that? It's basically, apparently it's a revolutionary idea, but it's the idea that you go into your freezer and you dig through it and you spend, or you eat what you already have. I think in the 80s that was called normal living, right? But it's this idea that you don't neglect what's already in your fridge, and you make dinner instead of going out to eat.
Nengpa being the two Korean words, Neng for 냉장고, which is refrigerator, and Pa being pada as in dig into. Oh, I see.
Yeah, digging it. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these are kind of lifestyles that are being sold to people. I, again, would like to note that there are people making money off of selling these lifestyles. And as someone I've actually tried the zero spend challenge. As I mentioned, I only made it one day without spending any money. But I found the mental load of like carrying all my water, all of my coffee for the day, trying to eat meals from my house in between going to different gigs and things like that quite impossible, and maybe not worth saving the 8,000 won that I would have spent on like a naengmyeon and a coffee or something, right? So I do think it's a little aspirational, this lifestyle, and probably not realistic for most people.
Right. In the meantime then, Steven, how are businesses responding to these spending patterns or lack of spending among young adults?
I just want to say that the idea of watching someone online go a day without spending any money sounds really boring, and I'm skeptical as to how big of an audience any of these new influencers are building, but that's kind of beside the point. I would say that a lot of businesses are doing what businesses always do, and they're adapting, and they're kind of trying to meet consumer tastes where they are. I mean, in doing a bit of research, I saw some reporting in the Straits Times, this newspaper, about that flagged how Daiso, the Korean retailer, has seen some increase in their sales revenue just because people are looking for cheaper options, and I guess Daiso's brand value has increased. There's a Daiso not far from where I live, which is in the Hongdae area, and there's constantly like lines out the door. A lot of foreign tourists who come here seem to have a Daiso on their list. I'm not exactly sure what you can get at Daiso that you can't get in the countries that they hail from, but I don't know how much of that is really new though, because having lived here for a long time, my impression of Korean folks has generally always been that Koreans like saving money, and Koreans are quite passionate in the pursuit of what in this country is called gasongbi, like value for money. It's kind of a national sport here to be like seeking out The barbecue restaurant that has high quality meat and generous portions. Discount coffee is a massive industry here. I think there's always been the commercial mindset here has always been like very in tune with the consumer's desire to save money where they can. I would just flag that the business, even though things do seem to be changing in some ways, like the economic and business incentives are going to remain the same. That any product that's really inexpensive is going to have a low profit margin, and luxury products, higher value products, are more expensive, but the variation between like what they cost and the amount of profit that the merchant is making and selling them is a lot bigger. So I'm sure that there will be some retailers who will tweak what they're doing or trumpet what they're doing as fitting the zeitgeist more snugly, but there's still going to be an economic incentive to create high value products, and there's not going to be a wholesale change, I don't think.
Right. In the meantime, Kelly, what have analysts been saying about the maybe impact or potential impact of such spending patterns on the social lives of the young people?
Yeah, from an optimistic perspective, I've read the take that this could encourage younger people to bond over more than food, shopping, and drink. I'm a little skeptical over whether or not that is true. I don't know if young people are like going to free art museums more because they want to save money, right? So some of it might be more like social life is driven kind of into the underground, so in homes and things like that. I mean, in the United States, so I went to university in Boston, alcohol is very expensive, and so is eating out in Boston. You're talking about maybe $18 for a beer over 10 years ago. And so what you would have instead is just a lot of people binge drinking in basement apartments, right? So there could be some kind of effect going on there. I think, like I said, it's a bit optimistic that young people are going to bond over hiking and going to art museums instead of eating out and drinking just to save a dime. With that said, it might change people to it might force people to change their social circle. You might find more like-minded people that are willing to spend less and hang out with them, or that are willing to bond over hobbies. But a lot of essays have been published about how this could encourage loneliness. People who don't want to date, who don't want to go out because they simply can't afford it. There's, for Korea specifically, been a lot of coverage about, Koreans having this desire to show that they have money and to kind of save face in this way. And so there's this idea that if you can't afford to take someone out to a nice dinner, just don't go out at all. So, I'm not really sure. I do think that from what I see, I mean, young people are still going out, and to Steven's point, these kind of like zero spend influencers, they do have a big following, but I think it's because they're selling an aspirational lifestyle rather than one that people can adopt, and I still think it's quite a fringe movement in general.
All right, keeping in mind what Kelly has just said, Steven, then do you see this particular trend as lasting, or does it look to fade?
I alluded to this earlier. I think these things are cyclical, and I think these things are, they reflect what's happening in the economy as a whole. So I think, in times of extravagance, in times of abundance, extravagance will follow. In times of belt tightening, then frugality will follow. I think that's the way it's always been. Maybe now there's going to be a certain mass of people who will deem it to be kind of like more responsible or cooler to be not displaying wealth or to not be consuming things. But if that remains in place for a while, there will naturally like emerge a movement of people who think that like conspicuous displays of wealth, or, I could see maybe a movement spurring coming from the idea that like all of this like reducing of the spending is having deleterious economic effects. Like going around the country, you see tons of empty stores, and a lot of like commercial areas seem like they're hanging on by their fingernails. And so like I'm not going to tell anybody how to spend their money, but like I make an effort to like in my neighborhood kind of like walk around and patronize my local businesses and buy something from my local bakery, have a coffee in my local coffee shop, support my local grocery store, just because I want to live in a neighborhood where those businesses are doing well and can keep their doors open. So no simple answers when it comes to this kind of thing.
You're right, promoting local tourism then. I remember right after the pandemic, we spoke about revenge spending, which you alluded to earlier, and then now we're talking about no-buy challenge. On a personal level, Kelly, How would you define mindful spending?
Well, I will say this topic is very relevant to me because I feel like the last year or so I have taken a look at my spending and tried to be a bit more mindful. And I think for me, it's really thinking through a purchase. So do I have something like this already? Do I need this? Am I buying this thing at Daiso just because I can't find it in my house? Or do I actually not have it in my home, right? And just to offer some tips, I mean, there are these free wardrobe apps. So believe it or not, based on the way I'm dressed right now, one of my weaknesses with shopping is clothes. I love buying clothes and shoes. And so there are apps where you can actually archive your wardrobe. So if you're out shopping, you can kind of pull it up and remember what you already have so that you're not buying another white t-shirt. Or kind of you can mix and match outfits. And it kind of feels like you're online shopping in your own closet as well. So it's a good way to remind you that you don't need like a 76 pair of sneakers just because it's a different color, right? And then on top of that, you know, I have been taking advantage of like the coupon deals that I get with my phone carrier and things like that, but also not letting those incentivize me to buy something that I wouldn't have bought already. And just remembering that you don't have to spend money every time you step out of the house simply because you stepped out of the house, right? But I will say, like, sustainability and climate change often fuels a lot of this conversation. I don't know if that is as effective to the average person as just kind of the selfish desire to save money where you can. And so if you find that you get a dopamine hit shopping for clothes, maybe there's a way you can archive your clothes where it feels like you're shopping for your clothes when you're just picking out an outfit.
Right. Steven, same question. What strategies do you recommend to ensure responsible spending?
One of my New Year's resolutions was to spend less. Like, I don't spend all that much. You know, I like buying clothes. I like buying books. But like, I'm not a like huge consumerist kind of person. Like, I guess I'm something of a minimalist. Like, I don't like owning a lot. Like, I can't stand being in a cluttered space. I get like the dopamine hit that Kelly was just referring to, of like that she might or somebody else might get from buying a new article of clothing. I get that from throwing out something. Like, if I see something in my house that like nobody is using, and I throw that away, and then the next time I look at that space, I just see emptiness. Like, I get a dopamine hit from that. But
I understand that.
I mean, the way that I'm not a like super skilled manager of money or anything, but like, I was raised very much, for immigrant household, like I was raised very much with the concept of spending, like always being the emphasis, like the idea, like don't spend money today so that you have that money in the future. And I do see the wisdom of that, but like I always felt like throughout my adult life, like I've lived a like reasonable balance of like enjoying myself in the present moment and like doing things that make me happy, like going out with my friends or taking trips or whatever it is, but not being excessive, you know, always making sure that like I have a kind of reserve amount of money that's there in case of emergencies. And you know, my wife and I bought a house last year, so that was a major milestone, and I couldn't have done that unless I was saving at least a fair amount of my income. So that's basically it. I don't have a ton of practicable steps there. I will certainly not be a spending influencer or any other kind of influencer anytime soon, because I've just said basically everything that I can share about financial planning.
Right. Kelly, if I were to ask you perhaps to identify a consumption tendency that is uniquely Korean, what would you choose to highlight?
Well, when I first moved here almost 10 years ago, I was really shocked at kind of the consumer culture around food trends. And I think some of that is actually spreading to the United States now. So it's not uniquely Korean anymore, but it was to me 10 years ago. When I was young, it was the honey butter chip. This was like a scarce thing that was impossible to get. And when you got it, you paid a premium for it and you shared it only with your best friend, right? It was kind of like the Labubu of food. And I think we've seen with like the Dubai chewy cookie, the dujongku craze, how wild this can get. People lining up for hours to get one cookie, pistachios going for 100,000 won a kilogram, restaurants having to take it off the menu, countries being low in supply because they're exporting so many pistachios. So that's kind of the extreme version of this. Right now it's like, or is it passé already? Like butter duck is like the thing. Yeah, and I mean, I will say the one thing I enjoyed about this was sometimes it can be a seasonal thing. So like when it's mango season, you see mango bingsu everywhere. You see these strawberry buffets at peak strawberry season. So that could be like potentially nice and sustainable, right? But I think what we're seeing more and more is that you're importing crops from other countries to the point where they have a deficit and the locals can't even enjoy it. So I think right now we're having an ube moment. I think the US had it first, and now it's hitting Korea, and I'm seeing ube lattes and ube cheesecake everywhere, right? And it's been reported in the New York Times that the Philippines has like a shortage, and they're not able to enjoy their own cuisine because of it. So that is something that I've noticed here that is spreading very quickly to the West. And it's probably because of TikTok and social media. I'll mention two more. This Greek yogurt with the lotus cookie trend, or the coconut Korean biscuits, that was the thing. And then the frozen jelly candies where you freeze them and then they become crunchy. Anyway, there's a lot of that. And it does make me wonder if it's like secret native advertising or something, but that is something that is very Korea coded to me.
All right, what about you, Steven? Based on your observations here, what appears to be uniquely Korean spending style?
I hope this doesn't sound flippant, but I want to say saving all your money for real estate and children's education seems to be like a kind of unique Korean style of money management. Like whenever I write about the Korean economy, like something that always comes back to is Korea has hit this point where it is a high income country, but it is still very reliant on exports because the level of domestic consumption is still fairly low. Like there's just not enough spending at home to sustain, you know, a lot of high income jobs here. And I have to assume that, you know, like I said, I bought a house recently, and like my wife and I like orienting our budget so that a huge portion of our income goes to our mortgage. And then our daughter just started school, and like the idea is that we cut spending on everything else and put all of our money towards these two things, the place that we live and the child we're raising. That was this very sobering moment for me, because it was a moment when I realized that the dynamics of the society that I've lived in for so long, that I always wrote about as a kind of detached observer, had really become my own life. So I try not to get too depressed about it, but
yeah, but congratulations on owning your home now.
That's thank you. That's you know,
a big milestone.
That is something to be happy about. We can get into that more another time, perhaps. It's a complicated picture, but my colleague wrote an interesting story recently about Korea's inheritance tax, and like how it's quite high, and like some households are taking measures to avoid it. And one bit of it that stuck out to me is a kind of wealth manager was quoted, and he said that when most Korean people reach retirement age, their portfolio is very simple. They have their house and they have some cash. They don't have what, you know, investment advisors would call a diverse portfolio. So that seems to be a kind of, it's not, of course, not unique to Korea, but like that seems to be like kind of the Korean convention. So as the society ages, and as the Korean government like confronts a lot more questions about like how to deal with that, how to deal with like the waning national pension, that's probably a worthwhile lesson that hopefully more people will follow through on, like as they get older, putting their money in different sources and finding different areas of growth. And the stock market is doing really well now, so maybe that's one option.
Indeed, and a topic to be discussed in another session, of course. All right, Steven, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Kelly, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks.
Right, that ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time next Monday. Have a great weekend.